Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us here on another episode of Startup Talks. I'm glad that we're joined today by Usman Javaid. Usman is the co-founder at Ricult. To elaborate on that, it's basically an Agritech startup started a couple of years back, and the name is derived from agriculture. So it's basically trying to transform the agri-tech space and how financing for small farmers is done. So thank you very much, Usman. Thank you for joining us here. How are you doing?
Thank you so much for having me. I am well. How about yourself?
That's great, sir. Thank you for asking. I'm glad that you're doing this on a Sunday. So thanks again. Sorry, on a Saturday, right? So thanks
Yeah.
again for that. Weekends are usually family time. It's good that you're giving time over here. So, Usman sir, starting with you, I was looking at your profile. You started off in the corporate sector, went through Nestle, went through Angro, started with Angro actually, and then moved on to Telenor, and all of a sudden you jumped into doing another MBA from MIT. What's the story behind that? What got you there?
Yeah. So I guess at a certain stage of life, you try and find more meaning
Mhm,
to life and what you're contributing to the society as a whole, and
mhm,
what is your role in making the world a better place. And I guess that before I quit my job, probably a year and a half before that, I had thinking about what's next in my life. I had a pretty solid career. I'd worked for top-notch companies, and
mhm,
so I could have continued staying on in the corporate sector, and I know I would have done well.
mhm,
But there was this one thing that was missing, and that was meaning. Because when you're in the corporate sector, you're primarily uh, a professional who sells his services for a certain compensation package,
mhm,
and you're driven by what your organization believes in. And I just felt that I'd reached a stage in my life where I wanted to do more than what I was doing at that moment, and I wanted to follow my own paths and build my own legacy.
mhm.
So the idea was primarily to go out there and explore and see whatever I've learned and try and implement that at a different stage.
Okay, that's great. Um, Looking at Recall, I see that you have raised about $6 million so far in the past couple of years. You've got some amazing names as your financiers, especially Wavemaker Partners, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and so on and so forth. So, what's the Recall story about? And what's Recall all about?
Yeah, so Ricult primarily is a fintech for agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is that we combine the power of data analytics
Mm-hmm.
and financial technology to help smallholder farmers work their way out of poverty. And the idea here is that, unfortunately, in most developing countries, but more so in countries like Pakistan and India,
Mm-hmm.
smallholder farmers have been excluded from the mainstream financial tools.
Mm-hmm.
Like they don't have access to bank accounts, they can't get bank loans because the banks are not willing to take a risk on them. The banks are not willing to take a risk on them because there isn't enough data for them to do a proper credit assessment.
Mm-hmm.
And hence, these farmers then fall prey to informal middlemen and loan sharks and get trapped in this debt cycle,
Mm-hmm.
which goes on for many generations. So the idea here was to see if we could develop uh, certain data assets
Mm-hmm.
which could help unlock the potential of mainstream banking and mainstream borrowing
Mm-hmm.
for these farmers. So that's what, in essence, we try and do. In simple terms, what we do is that we source data from multiple stakeholders
Mm-hmm.
in the agricultural value chain, like farmers, artis,
Mm-hmm.
banks, mills, input supply companies, whoever is involved in a particular value chain.
Mm-hmm.
We process that data through our proprietary algorithms and machine learning tools,
Mm-hmm.
and then we come up with actionable, insightful uh, uh, data points which help the stakeholders take informed decisions.
Mm-hmm.
So, just to give you an example, we work with banks to help them do credit assessment for these farmers, and that helps the farmers access loans at a cheaper rate without having to go through the uh, uh, extremely exploitative channel of the Aarti.
Mm-hmm.
And the bank benefits because it helps them lower their costs
Mm-hmm.
because they can now use data and technology to do something which they couldn't do previously.
Mm-hmm.
So this is just one example of the of how data can be used in agriculture to help an underprivileged section of the society improve.
Okay. So, it seems like what you're doing, you've actually picked up a fight with a lot of loan sharks, and that is in the farming sector in Pakistan. So, and you started off in 2015. How far have you come till now in 6 years? How many loan sharks have you eliminated?
So the objective is not to eliminate anyone. I think the
Mm-hmm.
objective is to improve the existing ecosystem and bring more transparency into the whole ecosystem. There's a huge misconception that the artis or loan sharks are bad people.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they're bad people. They're providing a service that no one else is willing to provide at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
No bank, if there were no RTs, the farmers would have no capital because the banks are not willing to provide capital. The
Yeah.
government is not willing to provide capital.
Mm-hmm.
It's only the RTs who take that level of risk. So wherever there is a high level of risk, wherever there's a high level of risk, you'll the lender will charge a higher rate of return.
Mm-hmm.
It's basic economics 101.
Yeah.
If my investment is risky, I would expect a higher return, and that's what the RTs are also doing
Mm-hmm.
because there is no recourse for them if the farmer defaults or if the farmer refuses to pay back the loan.
Mm-hmm.
So they have to cover up their defaults.
Mm-hmm.
So the idea is to actually enable these people also with tools
Mm-hmm.
so that they can lower their risk and at the same time make informed decisions. So instead of fighting with them, we are enabling them with tools. We work with about 8 to 10 of the largest RTs in Punjab,
Mm-hmm.
and we have helped them use technology now to uh, determine the credit worthiness of farmers, and that is, in fact, one part of our entire ecosystem.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Uh, uh, Agriculture is the biggest part of Pakistan's agriculture is based out of Punjab, right? And to some extent KPK as well. But um, coming from Sindh, over here, the culture is a bit different. You know it more than I do. That mm, farmers, small time farmers mostly, they fall into a debt trap, and that trap actually, unfortunately, goes on for generations. How is Recall taking care of that? How is it helping out small farmers to be more independent and to carry on with their own little piece of land?
So the key thing here is to determine what are at what stage does the farmer need capital.
Mhm.
And it's not that the farmer needs capital only at one time during the entire crop cycle. He needs capital at different stages. And what we are doing is to enable different lenders to provide that capital at different stages, because we use a lot of satellite based analytics to determine how the farm is performing. We share that information with the lenders, who can then take an informed decision that this farm is doing well.
Yeah.
So we can actually provide them with the capital they need to come up with a more successful harvest.
Okay. And you are working with all the banks in Pakistan, or just
No,
the?
we're working with a couple of microfinance banks and a couple of commercial banks, not all of them.
Okay, that's great. Now, moving on, Usman Saab, you've been involved with the tech ecosystem or the startup ecosystem in Pakistan. You've been advising as well some startups in alums, and you've seen you are a founder yourself, so you are more in line with how the ecosystem has been evolving. When you started off, at that time there was the concept of startups was not even known to many. Even educational institutions, they did not know. They knew, but there were no programs on entrepreneurship and all those kinds of things. So, yeah, what's your assessment? How has it evolved, and where is it heading in the next couple of years? There's talk of IT exports going over 5 billion, then they revised it to 7 billion by 2025. There's so much funding coming in, right? What's your holistic view on it?
So I think it is definitely moving in the right direction,
Mm-hmm.
and the government, especially the state bank, is very supportive.
Mm-hmm.
It's very progressive. They've come up with a lot of changes in their own portfolio of services to enable startups and to make things easier for them. The SECP is very progressive now. I remember when we started off, just registering a company was a nightmare back in 2016.
Yeah.
And now you can just do it online on the click of a button.
Yeah.
So there's a huge, huge change in just 4 or 5 years.
Mm-hmm.
So things are definitely headed in the right direction, but I wouldn't read too much into the investment that has come in
Yeah.
because of many factors. First of all, the investment, like 300 odd million dollars.
Mm-hmm.
Out of that, almost 100 or 110 million dollars comes from two companies.
Yeah.
So if you take them away, the 200 million dollars for a country of Pakistan size
Mm-hmm.
is almost negligible. I mean, if you compare yourself even to Bangladesh
Yeah.
or India, India is way ahead. But even if you compare ourselves to Bangladesh, we're still far, far behind. So I would caution against becoming complacent that we've done a really great job.
Mm-hmm.
I think $300 million odd investment in a country of 220 million people
Yeah.
is still very, very, very low.
Mm-hmm.
And that too, out of which two companies are driving the entire increase.
Mm-hmm.
So I would still think that we are on the lower side. Yes, it's a good increase, but our base in last year was so small that the increase looks very big.
Yeah.
So from that point of view, I wouldn't read too much into this. I think the important thing is to look at the trend over the next couple of years.
Mm-hmm.
And can this investment go up to, let's say, $700 million the next year, and then more than $1 billion the year after? Then we will say, yes, we are on the right trajectory. But we must caution ourselves of reading too much into this and becoming complacent,
Mm-hmm.
because this might also be a blip. So
Yeah.
so let's be very mindful of that. The other thing is that I because I mentor startups, I've been a mentor also in the US. I have been a judge in different startup competitions in Boston. I'm still associated with a lot of accelerators there.
Mhm.
What I see is there's a huge improvement in the quality of startup ideas that are coming up.
Yeah.
So just a few years ago, you had a very small niche segment focus, and now when I was going through the pitch presentations for the latest cohort of the National Incubation Center at Lums,
Mhm.
I was pretty amazed at the breadth and the diversity of new ideas
Mhm.
that were being explored by these young kids. So to me, that is a better measure of how this startup uh, thing is spreading. I think there are now lots of institutions, educational institutions, who are getting into this, and there's a lot more acceptability of entrepreneurship as an alternative career. When I started, I remember I had this talk in one of the classes at Lux, and I was talking about entrepreneurship.
Mhm.
And 95% of the students still wanted to go to a corporate job. And that's understandable because the society, unfortunately, at large, only establishes someone as successful if he has a good job in a multinational organization.
Mhm.
But I see a lot of that is changing now. There is more acceptability.
Mhm.
Parents are more amenable to letting their kids take this risk at the start of their career. Students are more excited. And the more we have local successes and local role models,
Yeah.
I think you will see more and more people move into this space.
It's good that you are probably the second person actually who I've spoken to who's actually pointed this out, and I'm glad that you did. That people or startup founders should not fall for the hype. I keep harking about this. You start a business. You start it not for the purpose of raising money or getting investment. You are there to solve a problem and grow a business and to create opportunities. I'm a firm believer that yes, small businesses and small startups will be the main drivers to creating opportunities. It's a global phenomena, and it's good that Pakistan is catching up on this. All this hype about fundraise and all that, right? You're absolutely correct in the fact that it's been driven by two main players, right? I know that you also know that probably that a lot of international investors, they are looking into the ecosystem in Pakistan, but they're still skeptical about coming into the country directly. Of course, there are some regulatory issues. They either try to uh, come to some sort of arrangement with the VCs who have been operating in the ecosystem for some time. Uh, but the good thing, I believe, to take from all of this is all the opportunity that has been created. Uh, it was difficult until 2, 3 years back for people to actually graduate from even from top-notch universities and get into a salaried role, but a lot of people can now start with these new startups, and a lot of opportunities are being created. Um, Having said that, I feel that there is an acute lack of resources that has come up in terms of talent, especially for technology and in the development space. Uh, what do you think? Is the ecosystem geared up, or is it gearing up to cover those shortfalls?
So, a couple of things to keep in mind here. First of all, when you talk about tech startup, the
Yeah.
most important thing is the technology that you build.
Mm-hmm.
And Pakistan have an acute shortage of high-class software developers.
Yeah.
Pakistan produces around 1,000 software engineers
Mm-hmm.
every year,
Mm-hmm.
out of which about 700 to 800 are employed by two companies only.
Mm-hmm.
And both these companies are based out of the US. They do software development for North America and European companies, and their uh, uh, team is based in Pakistan.
Mm-hmm.
So the remaining 200 people are divided amongst all the other players in the ecosystem. That is one thing to keep in mind. The other factor to keep in mind is that because of the role of the pandemic,
Yeah.
remote working is now accepted as a norm.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of companies outside of Pakistan, based either in North America or Europe,
Mm-hmm.
now tap into this pool of Pakistani engineers
Mm-hmm.
who they pay in dollars. And that has increased the price of these uh, engineers substantially.
Yeah.
And the other impact that it has created is that it's created a very high turnover
Mm-hmm.
for these employees. So when it comes to tech resources, we are definitely very, very short on good people.
Yeah.
And that is something that I would presume the educational institutions should take a leading role here. This is not something that the government can only drive, but the
Mm-hmm.
educational institutions need to increase their intake. There should be more educational institutions focusing on skills development. Everyone doesn't have to be an engineer. Nowadays, the whole concept of having a degree is outdated.
Mm-hmm.
What you need to know is a couple of skills, and if you have them, you can get a job. And we've hired some really good people who are not engineers,
Mm-hmm.
but who have enough knowledge about a particular language
Mm-hmm.
that they can get the job done.
Yeah.
And I think that is where building these digital skills is something that should be prioritized by the private sector, educational institutions, as well as by the government. And they must give incentives if they want Pakistan to be seen on the maps of startups.
Mm-hmm.
When it comes to other resources, again, there's been a huge brain drain in the last couple of years. Pakistan's best resources have left Pakistan.
Yeah.
And that to me is a big loss to Pakistan, because when you don't have good enough people or good enough resources in the country, then the local industry suffers.
Yeah.
And barring a few good schools, it's incredibly difficult to hire people who have basic management skills or basic product management skills,
Mm-hmm.
and that is definitely a challenge. So if we really want the ecosystem to grow in Pakistan, I think this is going to be one of the factors that need to be addressed.
Absolutely. Um, uh, some big schools, as you mentioned, uh, they are rolling out programs to bring about this cultural change into building these tech resources. That's good, but it needs to be a collective effort, I believe, right? Especially from key stakeholders who've been involved in the ecosystem for many years now. Unfortunately, that is still lacking, I believe. But some people have taken it upon themselves, right? I'm not going to take names, and it's good that they have that they are striving to bring about this change in their own individual capacity. Taking on from your previous comment, uh, uh, the vanity metrics of the population being 220 million and the growth factor in the ecosystem not being how it has evolved in countries like Bangladesh. I think if my opinion carries weight here, uh, if we see more of sort of like mergers or acquisitions or players from the greater MENA region, because MENA itself is a very scattered market, and uh, the ideal scenario for startups or like minded businesses to grow and expand would be places like Pakistan. And if that something like that happens, I think it will be a wonderful thing. But the other aspect, I believe that the recent downgrade for Pakistan from an emerging market, right? I think that may create a bit of hindrance. So for that, I believe SECP and the State Bank and other key regulatory stakeholders need to play a role. Coming back to Recult, uh, Agritech space, there are not a lot of people, not a lot of startups that are working over here, right? Uh, I'm not associated with agriculture in any way, but from a layman's perspective, or from what I understand, there's acute a shortage of access to not only capital but to hardware as well. Um, uh, what do you think is the uh, scope? I know there's big scope there, but what should be done in your opinion in the agri-tech space? What's not happening, and what should happen?
So that's a very open-ended question.
Yeah, like I said,
Uh,
I'm a layman here.
so agriculture is unlike any other industry. It's not an industry in itself,
Mhm,
but it's a collection of hundreds of different industries.
mhm,
So if you look at one particular crop,
mhm,
each crop has a lot of depth
mhm,
and a lot of breadth
mhm,
in terms of business opportunity. For just to give an example, if you just take the rice crop, the
mhm.
rice crop has multiple varieties.
Yeah.
You have one variety which is sown in a particular season, you have another variety which is sown in a different season, you have varieties which happen in water, which have you have varieties which don't happen in water.
Mhm,
So each one of these has a separate value chain and a separate ecosystem.
mhm,
So what this does is that it makes the agriculture space incredibly complicated.
mhm,
And trying to find a solution which will fit everyone
mhm,
actually becomes incredibly hard. So there's no one size fits all kind of a solution in agriculture.
mhm,
You have to be super focused and you need to identify a particular problem and then try and solve that and then move to the next problem. Uh, the second thing is that unlike building a social media app or building a messenger app,
mhm,
trying to solve problems in agriculture are incredibly hard.
mhm,
It's you have to be down on the ground. You need to roll up your sleeves. You need to be out there in the heat working with villagers and with illiterate people and people who don't understand technology. And so it's not glamorous. It's a lot of grunt work. It's a lot of hard work.
mhm.
And for entrepreneurs who are not willing to go through this grind, this is not for them. They would be better off just making an app and putting it on the app store and trying to monetize that.
Yeah.
So that is another reason why a lot of startups don't get into this space.
Mhm,
But to me, there are two big problems that stand above every other problem that farmers or agriculture faces in Pakistan.
mhm,
One is access to information or lack of access to information. And when I say lack of access to information, that there's a huge uh, price information asymmetry, there's a market information asymmetry, there's resource information asymmetry. People don't know, they don't have even basic knowledge of what are the best quality seeds. They don't know where they get the best price for their crops.
mhm,
They don't know where can they procure the best inputs from or the cheapest input from. So there's a huge lack of uh, access to information.
mhm.
And the second big problem is lack of access to sustainable capital.
Yeah.
And when I say capital, I use the word sustainable in inverted commas because if capital access is not sustainable, you will trap yourself in a debt cycle.
Mhm,
So to me, these are the two biggest problems that if they can be addressed, you can really unleash the power of agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And don't forget countries like Pakistan, uh, who are overly dependent on agriculture.
Uh-huh.
Their entire GDP growth is dependent on how the farmer does.
Mm-hmm.
So you can look at the recent past, where whenever agriculture has grown, your GDP has grown, and your entire economy starts moving because 70% of your population still lives in rural areas. No matter what we say, whether we like it or not, 70% of 220 million people live in villages. When they do well, the entire economy does well.
Yeah.
And then these 70% of these people generate almost 22% of Pakistan's GDP directly and almost 60% indirectly.
Mm-hmm.
45% of Pakistan's entire labor force
Yeah.
is deployed in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
So if we can't address these two problems,
Mm-hmm.
which is lack of access to capital and lack of access to information,
Yeah.
our agriculture sector is not going to take off.
Mm-hmm.
And if it doesn't take off, I honestly fear that Pakistan's growth potential will be hugely compromised. And all we need to do is just look at what countries like India are doing. I mean, they're far ahead of us when it comes to digital agriculture, when it comes to digital financing for smallholder farmers. The amount I was just talking to someone in the Indian government, and they've actually started this program where they've built a database of 50 million farmers.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine 50 million farmers
Yeah.
database, which now they've just opened up
Mm-hmm.
to all companies to utilize that database and build on that.
Mm-hmm.
So we as a country and as a government, we need to have a very clear agricultural policy, and we need to see how digital tools can play a role of an enabler and a multiplier in that policy.
Mm-hmm.
Because nowadays, without using technology, without helping farmers use technology to access capital, I don't think so we'll be able to create a huge impact.
I'm grateful that you're pointing out these tiny little issues. They seem tiny, but they're actually very big problems that need to be addressed, and um, it needs to be a collective effort. Now, we've actually gone over time, so I'm just going to squeeze in a last question. It's going to be a, a very broad question, taking into consideration all that we've talked about. Would touch a bit on Agritech and the whole startup ecosystem as well. Um, in Pakistan, you've traveled the world, you've been mentoring startups in Pakistan, judging competitions as well in Pakistan and in the US too. So you've got first-hand a look at all of these things. Um, in Pakistan, I feel that the startups that are coming on, they are more of a replication of what has already happened in other countries, right? I'm not saying it's bad. It's at least something is happening. It's good that it's happening, but uh, uh, looking at the broader scheme of things, y- I don't see much innovation taking place, right? There's in places like deep learning or machine learning or technology, right? If you look at logistics, same things have happened in other countries. If you look at your own agri-tech space, right, there's logistic players in agriculture too, right? In e-commerce, all models have already been explored in other countries, and in Pakistan we are seeing a replication of that. Um, do you think the a whole ecosystem, is it evolving in the right direction so that we see innovation in the next 2-3 years happen?
Yeah, so I wouldn't be too bothered about this because innovation is always relative.
Yeah.
We are moving away from zero digital access to better digital access. I mean, just to give you an example, till a few years ago, you would hardly use an app to order grocery for your home.
Yeah.
You would either send your domestic help or you would go yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Now you could do it on the click of a button.
Mm-hmm.
So that is innovation.
Yeah.
And that is innovation in the context of an industry which was completely non-digital or offline
Mm-hmm.
a few years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So innovation to me is always relative. It evolves over time. The greater the pool of engineers who start working on these problems, the greater you will see they'll start coming up with more sophisticated tools as we move along. I mean, when Amazon started also, it's not that they built their entire AI engine on day one. They
Yeah.
were just a book selling online store which connected a buyer and a seller.
Mm-hmm.
And now their entire AI engine is so sophisticated that they can actually tell what you're going to buy
Yeah.
in your next purchase.
Mm-hmm.
So this always happens over time. I wouldn't be too bothered about it. I think the important thing is that Pakistan is moving.
Mm-hmm.
That's the important thing. But as we move, we should not lose track of things that we can do better. And sometimes what worries me when I talk to all these startups is that they believe the metric of success is just getting funding. And I keep on telling them that generating investment is the easiest part.
Yeah.
It's building the business that is the most difficult part. Getting people who are willing to pay for your services
Mm-hmm.
is always the most difficult part. Getting a product market fit is always the most difficult part. So, with this last comment and through your platform, I would like to just re-emphasize this point to all the startups that focus on building a business.
Mm-hmm.
Investors will come after you themselves. If you spend your entire energy running after investors and don't focus on the business, you're on the wrong track.
To end this and to add to this last comment of yours, I think Allama Iqbal's proverb actually fits absolutely perfectly here कि खुद ही को कर बुलंद इतना कि हर तकदीर से पहले खुदा बंदे से पूछे कि बता तेरी तकदीर क्या है. Right, you build a business, right, you solve a problem, work your ass off if you have to. Funding is a secondary, just a means to an end.
Yeah,
It if it needs funding, people who want to fund, who want to get on your ship, they will come automatically. You don't have to be chasing after it, right, and ignore
yeah,
the business. Chale,
yeah.
Usman Saab, thank you very much for being here. It was a very insightful discussion, very good learning experience, at least for me. I hope it is for everybody. Hopefully, we'll do this again sometime. And inshallah, if I'm in Lahore, I would definitely love to meet you for at least a cup of coffee, if not dinner.
Zarur, Zarur. Most welcome.
Chale, sir, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you,
Have
Jay.
a great weekend.
Allah Hafiz.
Thank you. Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz.